We all love the Norse history. We all love Ragnar and the legends that came after Ragnar. Where would we be without Norse history, and especially in England, without their influence on the language and the times and the 8th, 9th and 10th centuries? But what are the three main reasons why the Norse came and invaded England, or Englander to the old Saxons? I find this to be fascinating. It's not a subject we talk about enough on the channel because the reasons why they came are so important. So of course, as always, the first reason why the Norse came from up north to England was because of wealth, and also because there was too many soft targets like Lindisfarne and York. They had the opportunity to find and take people's money, to steal your wealth, to steal your gold and silver. And when the Norse did that, so let's say Lindisfarne, there you are, you're in a longship, and there'll be the top elite warriors, and there'll be the warriors that are lower down in rank. The treasure was not shared equally. As you can see, I'm a wealthy Viking, so my share of the treasure would be larger than a peasant, you could say. But they came to England because the money and the wealth was so vast. I mean, let's face it, you're in the 9th century or the 8th century when you're coming over to invade 793 at Lindisfarne. The monks would have had chests and gold items and goblets and all manner of things. And it was also about slavery, and that's a massive aspect of the medieval world. Everybody was taking slaves because slaves had a value, but that's a whole entire subject for another day. So England at the time, in the 8th and 9th century, was a very soft target. The Norse were coming over in vast numbers, and as the time progressed, the heathen army came, and the armies got bigger, and people came because of fame, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So imagine yourself, you just raided Lindisfarne, you just burnt down the monastery, you got yourself a few slaves and a big chest full of gold. Oh, you're going to be very happy. You're going to be dining of that, living off that for a good while. But of course the Norse were thirsty for money, and everybody was. Money is such an important thing throughout time. And where would we be if the Norse did not come? Because England would be a different place entirely. And of course, within the Norse culture, it is a warrior culture. It is a culture that desires to be into battle, desire to take land, to take wealth, to take your gold. And that is such a fascinating aspect of the Norse culture. And that was very similar throughout many cultures, but we of course specialise in Norse and Anglo-Saxon history. And it's funny how the Anglo-Saxons didn't start going in longships and invading Norway, for instance, and the Scandinavian countries. That would have made history more fascinating, but that did not happen. There was also another massive problem in Scandinavia at the time, and that was the availability of land. Now, you go to Norway, there's some very big mountains and hills, and that land is not easy to live in. So most people lived around the coast. They live around the fjords, because the fjord had better quality land for farming. But for instance, you may be the son of Ragnar, and there's no land spare for you, and you hear of this country called England, and you think to yourself, I'm going to raise a longship and go there, because there's plenty of land, and there was. So land was also a massive aspect of why the Norse came to England, and why they invaded. They didn't want you just to invade, they wanted to settle, because Scandinavia and Norway and Sweden and Denmark also had a problem with population. There was too many people and not enough land for them to sustain themselves and feed themselves. A lot of Norway, as I said, is very barren. It is mountains, and mountains are not very good for farming. So population was also a very important aspect, that there was too many people, and in those times people had big families. So my father, if he was a Norwegian man, he may have had 20 children, and there's certainly accounts of warriors of the day having a lot of children. So Scandinavia was not a very generous place when it comes to farming the soil was thin, and what soil there was very limited. The farmsteads and the places you could farm were limited. A lot of it was very heavily wooded as well. And let's face it, if you got to go and knock down a few acres or hectares of trees, that takes effort. And then you got to pull the stumps out, and you got to work the land, and that takes generation after generation. So the very fact that the land was not the best land in the world, and then they came to England and they saw the green pastures, the mass fields, you could see why they decided to come over. And this is how we ended up with the Danelaw, because the Norse settled. And it makes sense. If you're coming over from Norway and you can get some land for free and build a longhouse and claim the land, then you're going to do it, aren't you? I would. And we often hear that phrase, England's green and pleasant land. And that is so true. You only got to get on a train or travel around England and you see the green fields and the pastures and the farms. It is a very good place for farming, and still is. And farming is such an important thing we must keep doing. But there was also a much bigger thing at work, and this is a third reason why the Norse came. It was because of word fame. And what is word fame? Well, word fame is being known and having a legacy after you die. So take Ragnar Lothbrok, like Ragnar Hairy Breeches. Most people who know anything about the Norse has heard about him. He is a legendary character, and he would love that. If Ragnar was here now, he would be smiling from here to here, knowing that his word fame has carried on and will carry on well into the future. And there's also the aspect of power, because where there's land, there's power. And of course, power and fame go together as well, because you have to be courageous, you have to be strong to be powerful. And that again pulled them in. It gave them a destiny. You know, the fates were at play, and they gave them the opportunity to get written down in the books, to be remembered after they die. And that is one of the main aspects as well why the Norse came. And there's many more. This is a subject we could talk about for hours and hours and hours. There's so much research, there's so many good books on this subject. But this is just a brief video talking about the main three things. And I think it's fascinating. Where would we be without people like Ragnar Lothbrok, you know, taking the brave step of sailing across the sea? And that was a very brave thing to do. Normally, before that, they would hug the coast and sail along the coast, and that is how they discovered countries. That is how they went to the Far East, like the Slavic countries and even the Mediterranean, because they hugged the coast. England was across, apart from near France of course, and Francia, England has a massive ocean and sea in between. So when he had the ability to navigate across the sea, that was a game changer. And of course the Norse had a compass, and they also had the stone, the sunstone, where they could see the sun through the clouds, and that also gave them the direction to go in. And for those two things, the compass and the sunstone, really brought about the Viking Age. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, do subscribe, do leave a comment, and it's goodbye from me. I'm going now to go and raid Francia.